The emergency klaxons screamed through the corridors of the Galactic Council's primary station, their piercing wails echoing off crystalline walls that had stood for over 3. Ambassador of the Empire pressed his six-fingered hands against his auditory organs, trying to block out the deafening sound as he rushed toward the emergency assembly hall. His scaled feet clicked rapidly against the polished floor, leaving small scratches in his wake. Around him, beings from dozens of species ran in barely controlled panic. They chittered frantically as their compound eyes darted in all directions. The massive, boulder-like granites rolled past with surprising speed, their rocky exteriors grinding against the walls. Even the normally composed energy beings known as the luminals flickered with unstable light patterns, their usual serene glow replaced by rapid, anxious pulses. Had never seen anything like this in his 47 years of diplomatic service. He had witnessed trade wars, territorial disputes, and even the occasional pirate raid, but nothing had ever prompted a full emergency assembly of the Galactic Council. The last time such an assembly had been called was during the Great Plague of Andromeda, nearly 800 years ago. As he rounded the final corner, could see the massive doors of the assembly hall standing wide open. Inside, representatives from over 200 species were gathering in their designated areas. The hall itself was a marvel of engineering, with a vast spherical chamber that could accommodate beings of all sizes and environmental needs. Atmospheric zones were carefully maintained, allowing methane breathers to sit alongside oxygen users, while aquatic species floated in specialized water columns. The ambassador found his designated spot among the other delegates and immediately turned his attention to the central dais, where High Chancellor of the was attempting to bring order to the chaos. The Chancellor's normally pristine white robes were disheveled, and his usually calm demeanor was nowhere to be found. "Fellow beings of the galactic community," his voice boomed through the translation systems, automatically converting his words into hundreds of different languages and communication methods. "We are gathered here today to address a threat unlike any we have faced in recorded history." The hall fell silent except for the various breathing, humming, and clicking sounds of its diverse occupants. Felt his blood chill as he noticed the fear in the Chancellor's eyes. In all his years of service, he had never seen show anything but confidence and control. 3 standard days ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected an anomaly in the outer rim sectors, the Chancellor continued. What we initially believed to be a rogue comet or asteroid has revealed itself to be something far more terrifying. A massive holographic display materialized above the central dais, showing a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red warning indicators pulsed ominously throughout the outer rim territories. "The entity has already consumed 17 star systems," said, his voice barely steady. "Every world, every moon, every artificial structure has been completely absorbed. Our reconnaissance drones that managed to transmit data before being destroyed show that this thing appears to feed on matter itself, converting everything it touches into more of itself." Panic chittering and roaring filled the hall as the implications sank in. Watched in fascination as the hologram showed the progression of the entity's path through space. It moved with purpose, not randomly like a natural phenomenon. This was something with intelligence behind it. "What of the inhabitants?" called out Ambassador of the Aquatic Collective, her voice bubbling through her water column speakers. "Surely some evacuated in time." The Chancellor's expression grew even more grim. There were no evacuation signals, no distress calls. The system simply went dark. Our analysts believe the consumption happens too quickly for any warning to be sent. "How quickly?" This question came from General of the Military Coalition, a species known for their tactical prowess. "Based on the data from our lost monitoring stations, each star system is completely consumed within 6 standard hours," replied. "The entity appears to start with the outer planetary bodies and work its way inward, gaining mass and speed as it progresses." The hall erupted in chaos. Representatives began shouting over each other in dozens of languages, their translation systems struggling to keep up with the cacophony. Some delegates were already heading for the exits, presumably to contact their home governments with evacuation orders. Remained seated, his analytical mind working through the implications. If the entity continued at its current rate and trajectory, it would reach the core worlds within 50 standard days. The thought was almost incomprehensible, civilizations that had existed for wiped out in a matter of hours. Order, order! The Chancellor's voice cut through the noise, enhanced by the hall's amplification systems. There is more you need to know. The babble gradually died down as representatives reluctantly returned to their seats. Many looked ready to bolt at the first opportunity. We have attempted to make contact with the entity, continued. Our most advanced communication arrays, broadcasting on every known frequency and using every form of transmission we have discovered, have yielded no response. Whatever this thing is, it either cannot or will not communicate with us. What about our military forces? General demanded. Surely the combined fleets of the galactic community can mount some form of defense. The Chancellor paused and could see him steeling himself for what came next. We tried. Admiral's Fifth Fleet intercepted the entity at the edge of the system. 237 ships, including 3 dreadnoughts and 12 carrier vessels. The silence in the hall was deafening. The entire fleet was absorbed in under 2 hours, said quietly. The entity's mass increased correspondingly, and its rate of consumption accelerated. This time, the panic was immediate and complete. Delegates abandoned all pretense of order as they fled toward the exits, watched as centuries of diplomatic protocol crumbled in the face of existential terror. Even the normally stalwart granites were rolling toward the doors as fast as their massive forms could carry them. Wait, the Chancellor's voice echoed through the rapidly emptying hall. There is one possibility, one hope. A few dozen delegates paused, though most continued their frantic exodus. Found himself among those who remained, driven by a combination of duty and morbid curiosity. The humans said simply. The remaining delegates exchanged confused glances, racked his memory, trying to recall what he knew about this species. They were relatively new to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only about 50 standard years ago. They occupied a small cluster of systems in what was considered a backwater region of the galaxy. With respect, Chancellor, said Ambassador of the Crystalline Consortium, what could such a primitive species possibly offer that our combined civilizations cannot? Activated another holographic display, this one showing detailed files on human military encounters. In their brief time among us, the humans have been involved in 13 separate military conflicts. In 11 of those conflicts, they were significantly outnumbered or both. The display showed battle statistics, casualty reports, and tactical analyses. Found himself leaning forward, intrigued despite the dire circumstances. They lost only 2 of those engagements, the Chancellor continued. And in one of those cases, they inflicted such heavy casualties on the hegemony forces that the hegemony eventually sued for peace anyway. Interesting but hardly relevant to our current situation, General interjected. This entity has consumed entire star systems. What could one small species do that our combined might cannot? The humans have a saying, replied, pulling up another file. They say that desperate times call for desperate measures. Our analysts have studied their combat doctrine, and we believe they may be the only species in known space with the psychological makeup necessary to attempt what needs to be done. The holographic display shifted to show tactical reports from various human conflicts. Read through them with growing amazement. The humans had repeatedly employed tactics that other species would consider insane, suicide runs that somehow succeeded, last-stand defenses that held against impossible odds, and strategic decisions that bordered on madness but yielded victory. Look at the Battle of Thermopylae Station, the Chancellor said, highlighting one particular engagement. 300 human soldiers held off an army of 30,000 hegemony troops for 3 full days, buying time for civilian evacuations. They knew they wouldn't survive, yet they never wavered. Or the incident at the colony, he continued, switching to another file. When Void pirates captured the colony's children as hostages, the human parents didn't negotiate. They didn't pay ransom. They armed themselves with mining equipment and launched a direct assault on a fortified pirate stronghold. They saved every single child, though the cost in adult lives was significant. Ambassador's voice bubbled through her speakers. What exactly are you proposing, Chancellor? Took a deep breath. The humans have technology that, while primitive by our standards, operates on principles we have never fully explored. They have a history of finding unconventional solutions to impossible problems. And most importantly, they seem to lack the sense of self-preservation that would prevent them from attempting something truly desperate. You want to send them on a suicide mission, General stated bluntly. I want to give them the opportunity to try something that no rational species would attempt, the Chancellor corrected. Something so dangerous, so unlikely to succeed, that it never would have occurred to any of us to try it. Found himself speaking before he fully realized it. What does their government say? Have they been contacted? The Chancellor's expression became even more grim. The human ambassador requested a private audience with me 3 hours ago. They've been tracking the entity's progress independently. They know what's coming. A chill ran down spine, and Ambassador's exact words were, "We'd like to volunteer for the impossible mission everyone's too smart to attempt." The remaining delegates sat in stunned silence. The implications were staggering. Not only had the humans correctly assessed the situation, but they had actually volunteered to face certain death. There's more, continued. They've been developing what they call Project Absolution for the past year. Our intelligence suggests it involves some form of experimental weapon that manipulates space-time itself. The theoretical principles are questionable at best. Questionable how? Ambassador asked. According to our scientists, the energy requirements alone should make it impossible to build. Even if it could be constructed, deploying it would likely destroy whatever vessel carried it. And even if it somehow worked perfectly, there's a significant chance it could destabilize local space-time to the point of creating a permanent dimensional rift. General leaned back in his seat. So you're saying their plan is to build an impossible weapon, mounted on a ship that will be destroyed in the attempt, and use it in a way that might tear a hole in reality itself? That appears to be the general idea, yes. And they volunteered for this. Enthusiastically. The hall fell silent again as the delegates absorbed this information, tried to wrap his mind around the human mindset. Every rational analysis suggested that their plan was doomed to fail and would likely kill everyone involved. Yet they had not only proposed it but seemed eager to carry it out. Chancellor said slowly, what kind of species volunteers for certain death based on a plan that probably won't work? Answer sent chills through every being present, the only kind that might actually succeed. Over the next several hours, the remaining delegates received detailed briefings on human psychology, military doctrine, and technological capabilities. What emerged was a picture of a species that was equal parts fascinating and terrifying. Humans, it seemed, had evolved under conditions that would have driven most species extinct. Their home world was a nightmare of natural disasters, predators, diseases, and environmental extremes. Yet somehow they had not only survived but thrived, spreading across their planet and eventually to the stars. Their psychology reflected this harsh evolution. Where other species had developed sophisticated risk assessment capabilities that kept them safe, humans had evolved something their own scientists called optimism bias, a tendency to underestimate the likelihood of failure and overestimate their own chances of success. This should have been a fatal flaw. Instead, it had become their greatest strength. Humans routinely attempted tasks that other species would reject as impossible, and their seemingly irrational confidence often became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Their technology reflected this same approach. While other civilizations had spent perfecting safe, reliable systems, humans had rushed headlong into dangerous experimental technologies. Their ships were faster but less stable. Their weapons were more powerful but more prone to catastrophic failure. Their entire technological base seemed built on the principle that spectacular success was worth the risk of spectacular failure. Their combat records show a pattern, General noted as he reviewed the files. They don't retreat when they should. They don't surrender when it would be logical. They keep fighting long past the point where victory should be impossible. It's not stubbornness, Ambassador observed. Their own psychological profiles suggest they genuinely believe they can find a way to win, even when all evidence suggests otherwise. Found one particular report especially illuminating. It detailed a human military operation where a small unit had been surrounded by enemy forces with no possibility of escape or reinforcement. According to the tactical analysis, surrender was the only rational option. Instead, the humans had spent the night rigging their own equipment to explode, then launched a suicidal assault that somehow routed an enemy force 10 times their size. Look at this, he said, sharing the file with the others. They turned certain death into impossible victory by refusing to accept that certain death was certain. As the briefings continued, a picture began to emerge of humanity's potential role in the crisis. Every other species in the galactic community had responded to the entity's threat with fear, despair, or desperate flight. Only the humans had looked at certain annihilation and asked, "How do we fight it?" Their proposed plan was insane by any rational standard. Project Absolution involved creating what they called a reality bomb, a weapon that would theoretically destabilize the fundamental structure of space-time in a localized area. The mathematical models suggested it could work, but the energy requirements were astronomical, the technical challenges seemed insurmountable, and the risks of deployment were literally incalculable. But the humans weren't concerned with rational standards. They saw a problem that needed solving and refused to let impossibility stand in their way. The entity feeds on matter, Ambassador had explained to the Chancellor earlier. But what if there suddenly wasn't any matter for it to feed on? What if we could create a region of space where the laws of physics themselves broke down? The plan was to intercept the entity before it reached the core worlds, deploy the reality bomb at point-blank range, and hope that the resulting dimensional instability would either destroy or contain the threat. The fact that the deployment ship would certainly be destroyed was not even discussed. It was simply accepted as a necessary cost. "How long do they need?" asked. "According to Ambassador, they can have a prototype ready in 30 standard days," the Chancellor replied. "They're requesting access to our quantum manufacturing facilities and a volunteer crew for the deployment mission. They're asking for volunteers for a suicide mission." "Actually, no," said with something that might have been admiration. "They already have their crew. 300 humans have volunteered for what they're calling the Absolution Run. They just need the facilities to build their impossible weapon." The delegates exchanged glances. The situation was beyond anything in their experience. They were being asked to enable what amounted to an elaborate suicide by an alien species that seemed to think dying heroically was a reasonable solution to an impossible problem. Yet what alternative did they have? Every conventional military response had failed. Every diplomatic attempt had been ignored. The entity continued its inexorable advance toward the heart of galactic civilization, consuming everything in its path. "I'll need to contact my government," said finally. "But speaking personally, I believe we should give them what they ask for." One by one, the remaining delegates agreed. It was madness, but it was the only madness available to them. 3 days later, the quantum manufacturing facilities at Station were placed under human control. The most advanced construction technology in the galaxy was turned to the task of building a weapon that shouldn't have been possible, designed by a species that refused to accept impossibility. Found himself assigned as a liaison to the human project, partly out of diplomatic necessity and partly out of his own fascination with their approach to the crisis. He arrived at Station to find it transformed beyond recognition. The normally pristine facility had been converted into something resembling a battlefield command center. Humans in military uniforms rushed between workstations covered in strange diagrams and equations. The air hummed with urgency and barely contained energy. He was met at the docking bay by Commander Sarah Martinez, the mission's tactical coordinator. She was a compact woman with prematurely gray hair and eyes that seemed to burn with inner fire. "Ambassador," she said, offering the human gesture of handshaking. "Welcome to Project Absolution, ready to help us break the universe." The casual way she discussed reality-destroying weapons should have been terrifying. Instead, found it oddly reassuring. If anyone was going to succeed at an impossible task, it would be someone who treated impossibility as a minor inconvenience. "I confess, Commander, I'm not entirely sure what my role here should be," he admitted, as she led him through corridors filled with frantically working humans. "Honestly, we're not sure either," Martinez replied with a grin. "We've never built a reality bomb before. We're kind of making it up as we go along." They passed through a series of security checkpoints before arriving at the central construction bay, stopped in amazement at what he saw. The weapon taking shape before them every conventional understanding of engineering. It was massive, easily the size of a small cruiser, but its structure seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. Energy conduits pulsed with colors that had no names, and the entire assembly seemed to exist in a state of constant, barely controlled flux. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Martinez said proudly. Our engineers are calling it the most dangerous thing ever built by any species anywhere. The power core alone could sterilize a planet if it went critical. And you're planning to detonate this thing while standing right next to it. That's the idea. The theoretical models suggest we need to be within 1,000 kilometers of the entity for maximum effect. Any further away, and the dimensional distortion might not be strong enough. Stared at the weapon in horrified fascination. Commander, do you understand what you're proposing to do? Martinez's expression became serious for the first time since he'd met her. We're proposing to die in the most spectacular way possible, taking the biggest threat the galaxy has ever seen with us. It's not exactly how I plan to spend my retirement, but it beats watching everything we've ever cared about get consumed by space cancer. The blunt honesty was somehow both shocking and inspiring. These humans weren't deluding themselves about their chances. They knew exactly what they were facing and had chosen to face it anyway. Why, asked. Why volunteer for this? Your species could evacuate to the outer rim beyond the entity's current trajectory. You'd have decades, maybe centuries before it reached you. Martinez was quiet for a long moment, watching her people work on their impossible weapon. Have you ever read human history, Ambassador? Some of it, yes. Then you know that we've never been very good at running away from problems. Oh, we'll retreat tactically when we have to, but we always come back. It's just how we're built. She gestured toward the weapon. This thing represents everything that's wrong with human thinking. It's dangerous, untested, probably suicidal, and definitely crazy. Then why? Because it's also the only chance anyone has, Martinez finished. Every rational species has looked at this entity and concluded that nothing can be done. They're probably right, but humans have never let being wrong stop us from trying. As if summoned by their conversation, a young technician approached with a data pad. Commander, we're getting some interesting readings from the quantum resonance chambers. Doctor thinks we might actually be ahead of schedule. Martinez took the pad and reviewed the data, her expression growing more excited by the moment. Outstanding. Tell Doctor that I want continuous monitoring of the resonance patterns. If we can maintain this level of stability, we might actually be able to complete construction in 25 days instead of 30. The technician nodded and hurried away. Martinez turned back to with the same unsettling grin she'd worn earlier. You know what the really crazy part is, Ambassador? I'm starting to think this might actually work. Spent the next several weeks at station, ostensibly serving as a liaison but increasingly simply observing the humans at work. What he witnessed challenged every assumption he'd ever made about rational behavior and optimal decision-making. The humans worked with a combination of scientific precision and reckless creativity that should have been contradictory, but somehow wasn't. They would spend hours perfecting the most minute technical details, then make wild intuitive leaps that bypassed months of conventional research. Their approach to problem-solving seemed to involve equal parts careful analysis and inspired guesswork. When a critical power coupling failed during the weapon's construction, the human engineers didn't waste time trying to design a replacement. Instead, they jury-rigged a solution using spare parts from 3 different systems, components that had never been designed to work together. Not only did their improvised fix work, but it actually improved the weapon's overall efficiency. How did you know that would work? Asked Doctor, the project's chief scientist. I didn't, replied matter-of-factly. But all the conventional solutions would have taken too long, so we had to try something unconventional. But what if it had failed? Then we would have tried something else. The nice thing about impossible projects is that you can't make them any more impossible by taking risks. The logic was simultaneously flawless and insane. Found himself both fascinated and terrified by the human approach to engineering. They treated catastrophic failure as merely another variable to be managed, not as something to be avoided at all costs. As the weapon neared completion, news arrived that the entity had consumed another dozen star systems and was accelerating. It would reach the core worlds in less than 40 days. The news sent waves of panic through the remaining galactic governments, but the humans seemed oddly energized by it. Good, Commander Martinez said when she received the update. The closer it gets to the core worlds, the more desperate everyone becomes. Desperation makes people willing to try crazy ideas. You're happy that billions of beings are in mortal danger? Asked, genuinely confused. I'm happy that people are finally scared enough to let us do what needs to be done, she corrected. Fear makes excellent motivation as long as you channel it properly. 3 days before the weapon's completion, disaster struck. A cascade failure in the quantum manufacturing systems destroyed nearly half of the facility's production capacity. Under normal circumstances, it would have meant months of delays while replacement equipment was installed and calibrated. The humans responded by working around the clock to jury-rig manual alternatives to the automated systems. They stripped parts from their own ships, cannibalized non-essential station equipment, and improvised solutions that would have horrified any rational safety inspector. "This is madness," protested as he watched human technicians literally crawling inside active quantum reactors to make manual adjustments. "You're going to get someone killed." "Probably," Martinez agreed cheerfully. "But if we don't finish this weapon, everyone gets killed anyway. I'll take probably over certainly any day." In the end, they completed the weapon exactly on schedule. The final product was even more terrifying than the prototypes had suggested. Reality seemed to bend around it, creating visual distortions that hurt to look at directly. Energy readings fluctuated wildly, and several of the monitoring instruments simply stopped working when pointed at it. "Is it safe to transport?" asked nervously. "Define safe," Doctor replied. "It probably won't explode during transport. Beyond that, all bets are off." The weapon was loaded onto the human ship, Absolution's Edge, a heavily modified cruiser that had been stripped of everything except engines, life support, and the deployment systems needed to fire the reality bomb. The volunteer crew of 300 boarded with the same casual attitude they might have shown for a routine patrol mission. Attended the departure ceremony, such as it was. The humans didn't seem interested in elaborate speeches or dramatic goodbyes. Commander Martinez simply shook hands with the station personnel and walked aboard her ship with a cheerful, "See you on the other side." As the ship prepared to depart, found himself asking the question that had bothered him throughout his time at station. "Commander, do you really believe this will work?" Martinez paused at the airlock and considered the question seriously. "You know, Ambassador, I honestly don't know. The mathematics are theoretical, the technology is experimental, and we're about to attempt something that has never been tried before under conditions that are essentially unprecedented." "Then why?" "Because believing it will work is the only way it possibly can work," she finished. "If we went into this expecting to fail, we'd fail for certain. But if we go in believing we can succeed, then maybe, just maybe, we actually will." The airlock sealed with a soft hiss, and moments later the Absolution's Edge undocked from station. Watched from the observation deck as the ship accelerated toward its rendezvous with the entity, carrying 300 humans and their impossible weapon toward what seemed like certain death. As the ship disappeared into faster-than-light travel, he realized that for the first time since the crisis began, he actually felt hope. Not because the mission was likely to succeed. Every rational analysis suggested it would fail spectacularly. But because somewhere in the galaxy, 300 beings were refusing to accept the impossible and fighting back against the darkness. Whether they succeeded or failed, they had already accomplished something remarkable. They had transformed despair into defiance, and that transformation itself was a kind of victory. The entity continued its inexorable advance toward the core worlds, consuming everything in its path. But for the first time, it was being hunted rather than simply avoided. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, humanity was about to make its answer to the universe's greatest threat. The bridge of the Absolution's Edge hummed with controlled tension as the ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Helix Nebula. Captain Maria Santos stood at the central command console, her weathered hands steady despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. Around her, the crew moved with the practiced efficiency of veterans, though most had never served together before volunteering for this mission. "Sensor sweep complete, Captain," reported Lieutenant Commander from the tactical station. "We've got it on long-range detection. Distance, 47 million kilometers and closing." "Put it on the main screen," Santos ordered. The shimmered to life, showing what appeared to be empty space dotted with distant stars. Then the computer enhanced the image, and collective breath was drawn across the bridge. Where the Helix Nebula should have been a magnificent stellar nursery that had birthed stars for millions of years, there was nothing but an expanding sphere of absolute blackness. "Sweet mother of," whispered Ensign from the communications station. "Belay that," Santos said sharply. "We knew what we were getting into when we signed up for this. Mister, what's our estimated time to intercept?" Consulted his instruments, his face pale but determined. "At current approach vectors, we'll reach optimal firing range in 14 hours, 37 minutes. Santos nodded grimly. 14 hours to prepare for what was quite possibly the last action any of them would ever take. She activated the ship-wide communications system. "All hands, this is the captain. As you can see on your monitors, we've made contact with the target. In approximately 15 hours, we will engage in what our mission planners are calling the most important battle in galactic history. I won't lie to you, our chances of survival are essentially zero. But our chances of making a difference, well, that's what we're here to find out." She paused, looking around the bridge at faces that showed fear, determination, and something else. A peculiarly human mixture of excitement and defiance in the face of impossible odds. "Doctor reports that the absolution device is operating within acceptable parameters. All systems are green for deployment. In the meantime, I suggest you use these next few hours to make your peace with whatever you need to make peace with." Santos out. As the announcement ended, the bridge returned to its routine operations, but the atmosphere had changed. There was a sense of finality now, but also of purpose. These men and women had volunteered knowing they wouldn't come home, and somehow that knowledge had freed them from the fear that might have paralyzed others. "Captain," called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council. They're requesting a status update." "Put them through." The shifted to show the emergency session of the Galactic Council. Ambassador was among the faces visible, along with dozens of others representing species from across the galaxy. Chancellor stepped forward. "Captain Santos, the thoughts and prayers of 200 civilizations go with you. Is there anything we can do to assist?" Santos considered the question seriously. "Actually, yes. We need you to clear all civilian and military traffic from a sphere approximately 10 light-years in diameter centered on our current position. If this works the way our scientists think it will, the dimensional effects could be unpredictable." 10 light-years? The Chancellor's voice betrayed his shock. "Captain, there are inhabited systems within that radius." "Then evacuate them. We estimate we have about 18 hours before things get interesting. After that, anyone in the area is likely to experience what our physicists are calling existential discontinuity." Meaning they might stop existing in any meaningful sense of the word. The silence from the council chambers was deafening. Finally, Ambassador spoke up. "Captain, are you certain this is necessary? The affected systems contain over 12 billion sentient beings." Santos felt the weight of those lives pressing down on her, but her voice remained steady. "Ambassador, in approximately 36 hours, this entity will reach the system, where it will consume over 40 billion beings. In 72 hours, it will reach the core worlds. If we don't stop it here and now with this weapon, there may not be anyone left to save." The truth of her words hung in the air like a physical presence. The choice was stark. Evacuate 12 billion beings and possibly save the galaxy, or hesitate and watch everything die. "We'll begin immediate evacuation procedures," the Chancellor said finally. "May the stars guide your aim, Captain." "Thank you, Chancellor. We'll do our best not to disappoint you." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in contemplative silence. 12 billion people, Ensign said quietly. 12 billion people who'll have a chance to live if we do this right, Santos replied. "Focus on that." As the ship continued its approach toward the entity, reports began streaming in from the various departments. The absolution device was holding stable, though several monitoring systems had failed due to what Doctor described as reality-induced feedback loops. The ship's engines were performing beyond specifications, pushed by modifications that would have been considered reckless under normal circumstances. "Captain," called Chief Engineer Murphy over the intercom, "I'm seeing some unusual readings from the quantum core. The entity's gravitational field is affecting our dimensional stabilizers." "How unusual?" "Well, the good news is that it's not going to explode. The bad news is that time might be flowing differently in various parts of the ship. Engineering is running about 3% slower than the bridge." Santos rubbed her temples. Only humans would build a weapon so dangerous that approaching the target caused time dilation. "Can you compensate?" Already working on it. I've got teams manually synchronizing the chronometers throughout the ship. We should be back to normal temporal flow in about 6 hours. Outstanding, keep me informed. As the hours passed, the entity grew larger on the... What had initially appeared as a simple sphere of darkness revealed itself to be far more complex. The surface writhed with patterns that hurt to look at directly, and occasionally tendrils of absolute blackness would extend outward, reaching for matter that was no longer there. "It's beautiful," Doctor said softly as she joined Santos on the bridge. "Terrifying but beautiful. Look at the way it moves. There's intelligence there, but not intelligence as we understand it." "Have you learned anything that might help with targeting?" Santos asked. Pulled up a series of sensor readings on a nearby console. The entity appears to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. That's actually good news for us. Our weapon is designed to disrupt dimensional boundaries. The more dimensions it occupies, the more vulnerable it should be to our attack. Should be. Well, that's the theory anyway. We won't know for certain until we try it. Santos nodded. The entire mission was based on theories and educated guesses. It was the most expensive experiment in galactic history, and the cost of failure was extinction. Captain's voice was sharp with alarm. The entity just changed course. It's moving directly toward us. The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. The entity had noticed them. For something that had shown no reaction to any previous attempt at contact, this was unprecedented. "Range?" Santos asked. 32 million kilometers and closing fast. At current acceleration, it will reach us in... Captain, this doesn't make sense. What? According to these readings, it will reach us in negative time. The sensors are showing that it's already here, but that's impossible. Doctor's face went white as she studied her instruments. It's not impossible. The entity is manipulating space-time around itself. It's creating a causality loop, effect preceding cause. Meaning that from the entity's perspective, it has already caught us. We're seeing the aftermath before the event actually occurs. Santos felt a chill run down her spine, but her voice remained calm. "Options. We fire now," said simply. "If we wait for optimal range, we may find that we've already been consumed before we get the chance to shoot. All stations, this is the captain. Battle stations, prepare for immediate deployment of the absolution device." Klaxons began sounding throughout the ship as the crew rushed to their positions. The bridge lighting shifted to red as tactical systems came online. "Device status," Santos called out. "Charging sequence initiated," replied, her hands flying over her controls. "We'll have full power in 90 seconds. Target the entity's center mass. Best guess where that might be." "Aye, Captain, targeting solution locked." The entity continued its impossible approach, growing larger on the screen with each passing moment. Santos could now see details in its structure, swirling patterns of darkness that seemed to contain entire galaxies, surface features that shifted between dimensions, and something that might have been sensory organs scanning their ship with alien curiosity. "It's trying to communicate," reported from his station. "I'm picking up transmissions on frequencies I didn't know existed." "Can you translate?" "Working on it, Captain. I think it's asking what we are." The irony was not lost on Santos. After consuming 17 star systems without acknowledgement, the entity was finally trying to communicate with the species that had come to destroy it. "Tell it we're humanity," she said. "Tell it we're the ones who fight back." Worked frantically at his console for several seconds. "Message transmitted, Captain. It's responding." "What does it say?" I think it's laughing." "Device status." 60 seconds to full charge," reported. "Captain, the entity's approach is creating temporal distortions throughout the ship. If it gets much closer, we may not be able to maintain targeting lock." "Understood. Prepare to fire on my command." The entity was close enough now that its gravitational field was affecting the ship systems. Lights flickered as power fluctuated, and several crew members reported feeling disoriented. 30 seconds to full charge," called out. The entity's surface suddenly erupted with activity. Tendrils of darkness reached out toward the ship, and the temperature on the bridge began to drop rapidly. "It's trying to absorb our ship remotely," reported. Hull temperature dropping fast. We've got ice forming on the outer plates. 15 seconds. Captain called out, his voice tight with fear. It's in my head. The entity, it's in my head. It's showing me. Oh God, it's showing me what happened to the other systems. The people didn't die, Captain. They're still alive in there, but they're part of it now. Santos felt horror claw at her mind, but pushed it aside. Stay focused, Ensign. Just a few more seconds. 10 seconds to full charge. The entity was so close now that it filled the entire. Its surface patterns were hypnotic, drawing the eye into depths that seemed to contain entire universes. Several crew members had to look away to avoid becoming entranced. 5 seconds. Captain's voice was filled with panic. The entity is trying to absorb the weapon if it succeeds. Fire, Santos commanded. Fire now. His hand slammed down on the firing control, and the universe exploded. The absolution device discharged its accumulated energy in a focused beam of pure dimensional disruption. Reality twisted around the beam's path, creating visual effects that the human eye was never meant to process. Space-time itself screamed as fundamental forces were torn apart and rewoven. The beam struck the entity dead center, and for a moment nothing happened. Then the entity's surface began to ripple like water. The ripples grew larger, more violent, until entire sections of the creature's structure began to collapse in on themselves. Direct hit, called out triumphantly. The entity is destabilizing. But their celebration was short-lived. Instead of dying, the entity began to change. Its surface, previously uniform darkness, now showed patches of brilliant light. The creature was adapting, using the energy from their weapon to evolve into something new. Santos shouted over the growing dimensional storm. What's happening? It's using our weapon against us, replied, her voice barely audible over the chaos. The dimensional disruption isn't destroying it, it's teaching it how to manipulate reality directly. The entity's new form was even more terrifying than before. It had gained the ability to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously while maintaining coherence across all of them. Tendrils of restructured spacetime reached out from its surface, touching distant star systems and beginning to convert them without physical contact. We made it stronger, Santos said in horror. No, said suddenly, studying her readings with desperate intensity. Not stronger, different. Captain, look at the quantum signatures. Santos glanced at the data was displaying. I don't understand. The entity isn't absorbing matter anymore. It's absorbing information, reality itself. It's trying to consume the very concept of existence. The implications hit Santos like a physical blow. If the entity succeeded in its new form, it wouldn't just destroy the galaxy. It would unmake it, retroactively erasing everything that had ever existed. Options, she asked. 1, said grimly. We overload the absolution device. Instead of firing a controlled beam, we detonate it at point-blank range. The explosion will tear a permanent hole in space-time. And us? We'll be at ground zero of a dimensional explosion. We won't just die, we'll never have existed in the first place. Santos looked around the bridge at her crew. They were all listening, all understanding exactly what was proposing. Complete ontological annihilation in exchange for a chance to stop the entity. Will it work? Santos asked. I don't know. The explosion will definitely damage the entity, but whether it will be enough to destroy or contain it, that's impossible to calculate. Crew, Santos said over the ship-wide comm, you heard the situation. We have one option left. Anyone who wants to object can do so now. The silence that followed was profound. Not one voice was raised in protest. Very well, Santos said. Doctor, begin overload procedures. As work to reconfigure the weapon for detonation, the entity continued its evolution. It had now learned to manipulate causality directly, creating localized time loops and paradoxes. Several star systems were being consumed backwards through time, their destruction preceding their creation. Overload sequence initiated, reported. We have approximately 3 minutes before detonation. Santos activated the communications array one final time. This is Captain Santos of the Absolution's Edge to Galactic Council. The entity has evolved beyond our initial projections. We are proceeding with terminal protocols. The dimensional explosion will create a permanent spatial anomaly approximately 15 light-years in diameter. Recommend immediate evacuation of all vessels within 50 light years. Chancellor's voice came back immediately. Captain, is there no alternative? None that we can see, Chancellor. It's been an honor serving with the Council. The honor has been ours, Captain. Your species. Your incredible species. History will remember what you've done here. History is exactly what we're trying to save, Santos replied. Santos out. She closed the channel and turned to face her crew. 300 of humanity's finest, about to sacrifice not just their lives, but their very existence for the chance to save a galaxy that had never fully understood them. 2 minutes to detonation, announced. The entity seemed to sense what was happening. Its attacks on the ship intensified, and reality began breaking down around them. Crew members reported seeing their dead relatives, impossible geometries, and memories of events that had never happened. 1 minute. Santos gripped the captain's chair as dimensional effects washed over the bridge. For a moment, she saw herself as a child, playing in the gardens of Earth. Then she was elderly, dying peacefully in bed. Then she was a completely different person living a different life on a world that didn't exist. 30 seconds. The entity was trying to absorb them directly now, pulling their consciousness into itself. Santos could feel her memories being examined by something vast and alien. But underneath the fear, she felt something else, a burning determination that seemed to surprise the entity. 10 seconds, called out, her voice distorted by temporal effects. Captain, it's been an honor serving with you. The honor was mine, Santos replied. All of you, it's been the greatest privilege of my life. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The Absolution's edge ceased to exist in a flash of pure white light that could be seen from 3 galaxies away. The dimensional explosion that followed tore a hole in reality itself, creating a zone where the normal laws of physics no longer applied. The entity, caught at ground zero of the detonation, found itself trapped between dimensions. Its new abilities to manipulate reality became a liability as the very concept of reality became undefined in the explosion's aftermath. For a moment that lasted eternity, the entity struggled against the dimensional storm. Its consciousness, spread across multiple planes of existence, began to fragment as the stability that held it together was torn away. Then, with a sound like the universe screaming, the entity collapsed. Not destroyed, that would have been too simple, but compressed into a single point of infinite density and zero dimension. It still existed, but it existed nowhere and trapped forever in a space between spaces. The explosion's effects rippled outward at faster-than-light speeds, carried by dimensional waves rather than normal physics. Across the galaxy, every civilization with adequate sensors detected the massive disruption. What they saw description, a sphere of twisted spacetime where normal matter could not exist, surrounded by a shell of impossibility that would persist until the heat death of the universe. At station, Ambassador watched the sensor readings with a mixture of awe and profound sadness. The humans had done it. They had stopped the unstoppable, defeated the undefeatable. They had saved the galaxy by sacrificing themselves so completely that they had never existed to begin with. The dimensional anomaly left behind, by their sacrifice, would serve as a permanent monument to human determination. A place where reality itself bent around the memory of 300 people who had refused to accept the impossible. They did it, Chancellor said softly. The humans actually did it. What do we do now? Asked General. Considered the question carefully. The entity was gone, trapped in a dimensional prison of its own making. The immediate threat was over. But something more important had been lost, the memory of the species that had saved them all. We remember, he said finally. The dimensional explosion may have erased them from reality, but it couldn't erase what they accomplished. We make sure that every species in the galaxy knows what happened here. We make sure that the name, humanity, is never forgotten. But how can we remember a species that never existed? Asked. Because they did exist, replied firmly. They existed enough to save us all. The fact that they paid for that salvation with their very existence doesn't diminish what they accomplished, it makes it more remarkable. In the weeks that followed, the Galactic Council worked to establish what they called the Human Memorial Archive. Using fragmentary records that had somehow survived the dimensional explosion, they reconstructed as much of human history as possible. The archive would serve as a testament to a species that had embodied the best qualities of courage, determination, and sacrifice. The dimensional anomaly created by their final battle was designated as a protected space. No ships would enter, no colonies would be established. It would remain forever as a reminder of the price that had been paid for galactic survival. But in the deepest, most classified sections of the archive, a few theorists worked on a different project. Doctor's final transmission, sent just before the dimensional explosion, contained what appeared to be equations for revering the process. The calculations were incomplete and possibly impossible to implement, but they offered a tantalizing possibility. Perhaps someday, when galactic civilization had advanced far enough, they might be able to reach into that dimensional prison and rescue the species that had saved them all. Perhaps the human sacrifice wasn't permanent. Perhaps their story had not yet reached its final chapter. Until then, the galaxy would remember. Every child would learn the story of the impossible species that had looked at certain destruction and asked, "How do we fight it?" Every civilization would tell tales of the warriors who had saved existence itself by accepting non-existence. And in the twisted space where reality no longer made sense, an echo of 300 human voices could still be heard, whispering the words that had become their eternal epitaph. We came, we fought, we saved everyone. 500 years had passed since the dimensional explosion that saved the galaxy, and the universe had settled into an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity. The Human Memorial Archive had become the most visited site in galactic space, drawing billions of pilgrims annually to pay their respects to the species that had saved them all. Dr. Lyra, a quantum physicist from the newly advanced collective, stood before the massive crystalline structure that housed the archive. As a child, she had listened to the stories of humanity with the same fascination that others reserved for mythology. As an adult, she had dedicated her life to understanding the dimensional mechanics that had made their sacrifice possible. "The memorial service will begin in 10 minutes, announced her research partner, doctor of the Hegemony Science Division. The irony was not lost on either of them that their species had once been at war, but humanity's legacy had inspired a galaxy-wide commitment to cooperation. "Any word from the quantum archaeology team?" Lyra asked as they made their way through the crowds of beings from hundreds of species, all gathered for the quincentennial memorial ceremony. "Professor believes they're close to a breakthrough," replied. "The new temporal resonance chambers are detecting patterns in the dimensional anomaly that suggest organized information rather than random quantum fluctuations." Lyra felt her heart's race with excitement. For 5 centuries, the greatest minds in the galaxy had been working on what they called the Restoration Project, an attempt to reverse the dimensional explosion that had erased humanity from existence. The theoretical groundwork had been laid decades ago, but the practical challenges seemed insurmountable. The memorial ceremony began with Chancellor of the Reformed Galactic Council reading the names of the 300 humans who had crewed the Absolution's Edge. Though their existence had been retroactively erased, fragments of information had survived the dimensional collapse, allowing historians to piece together partial records. "Captain Maria Santos," the Chancellor intoned, her voice carrying across the vast assembly. "Commander Sarah Martinez, Dr. Elizabeth, Lieutenant Commander Way." The list continued for nearly an hour, each name representing a being who had chosen non-existence over allowing evil to triumph. As the names were read, holographic displays showed what little was known about each crew member, fragments of service records, partial biographical data, and in a few cases, actual images recovered from quantum echoes in the dimensional anomaly. When the ceremony concluded, Lyra and made their way to the restricted research facility hidden beneath the memorial. Access required clearance from 3 separate galactic agencies, but their work on the Restoration Project granted them the highest level of authorization. Professor, the project's chief scientist, met them at the entrance to the main laboratory. Her features showed the strain of centuries of work, but her eyes burned with the same determination that had once characterized humanity itself. "We've had a significant development," she announced without preamble. "The quantum archaeology team has successfully mapped the internal structure of the dimensional anomaly. What we found, well, it changes everything." She led them through corridors lined with the most advanced scientific equipment in galactic history. The restoration project had received unlimited funding from every major civilization, making it the largest cooperative scientific endeavor ever undertaken. The main laboratory was a vast chamber centered around a perfect sphere of crystalline material that seemed to bend light around itself. This was the dimensional interface, the closest that physical matter could approach to the anomaly without being torn apart by conflicting realities. "Show them the scans," instructed her assistant, a young researcher named. The holographic displays that materialized around them showed cross-sections of the dimensional anomaly in impossible detail. But what they revealed was not the chaotic quantum foam that scientists had expected to find. Instead, they showed structure, organization, and something that looked remarkably like. "Is that a ship?" Lyra asked in amazement. "Not just a ship," replied. "The Absolution's edge is still in there, frozen at the moment of the dimensional explosion, but that's not the most remarkable part." The display zoomed in, revealing finer details of the anomaly's interior. Within the crystallized spacetime, clearly visible despite 500 years of dimensional distortion, were 300 distinct quantum signatures. "They're alive," whispered. "The humans are still alive in there." "Not alive in any sense we understand," corrected. "But their consciousness, their essential being, is preserved in a state of quantum suspension. The dimensional explosion didn't destroy them. It froze them between seconds, between heartbeats, between thoughts." Lyra stared at the displays in wonder. "Can we reach them?" "That's what we've been working on for the past 50 years, replied. "The mathematics are incredibly complex, but theoretically possible. We would need to create a localized reality bubble within the anomaly, then gradually expand it until we can establish physical contact with the preserved ship." "What would that require?" "The combined energy output of 17 star systems, quantum processing power that doesn't yet exist, and a level of dimensional manipulation that we're only beginning to understand." Lyra felt her excitement dim. The challenges seemed as impossible as the original human mission had been. "However," continued with a slight smile, "we've recently received some unexpected assistance." She gestured toward another section of the laboratory, where a team of researchers was working around what appeared to be a small, localized version of the dimensional anomaly. But this one was artificial, created and controlled by technology that Lyra didn't recognize. 3 months ago, we received a communication from the Outer Rim territories. A species we'd never encountered before, calling themselves the Eternal Wanderers, offered to help with the restoration project. "I've never heard of them," said. Neither had anyone else. They claimed to be descendants of a civilization that existed before our recorded history. According to their representative, they've been watching galactic development for millions of years, waiting for a species to emerge that demonstrated the kind of selfless courage that humanity showed. Led them closer to the artificial anomaly, where they could see researchers from a dozen different species working alongside beings that looked unlike anything in known galactic taxonomy. The Eternal Wanderers were tall, graceful creatures that seemed to be composed of living crystal, their surfaces reflecting not light but possibility itself. "They possess technology that operates on principles we're only beginning to grasp," explained. "Consciousness transfer, reality manipulation, temporal engineering, capabilities that make our most advanced systems look primitive by comparison." One of the Wanderers approached their group, moving with a fluid grace that suggested it existed as much in thought as in physical form. When it spoke, its words appeared directly in their minds rather than being heard through their ears. "Greetings, Doctora," the being communicated. "I am Harmony of Distant Stars. I have followed your research with great interest." "You know my work?" Lyra asked, surprised. "We know the work of all who seek to restore the Guardians," Harmony replied. "That is what we call them, the species that saved not just this galaxy, but the principle of sacrifice itself." "Can you really help us bring them back?" Harmony's crystalline form shifted, patterns of light playing across its surface in what might have been amusement. "Bring them back? Child of science, they never left. They exist in a state between existence and non-existence, between heroism and legend. What we can do is provide them with a choice." "A choice?" "The choice to return to linear existence, or to remain as they are, eternal guardians standing watch over reality itself." Professor stepped forward. "Harmony of Distant Stars, Our calculations suggest that extracting them from the dimensional anomaly could destabilize the entire structure. The explosion that created it has been containing residual effects from the entity they destroyed. If we disrupt that, the entity still exists within the anomaly, Harmony confirmed. Compressed to a single point of malevolent possibility, but not destroyed. The human's sacrifice created a prison that has held it for 5 centuries. Freeing the humans risks freeing their prisoner as well. The implications sent chills through the research team. The entity that had threatened to consume the galaxy was still there, still dangerous, held in check only by the dimensional barriers created by humanity's final sacrifice. Then we can't take the risk, said firmly. We can't endanger the galaxy just to satisfy our own desire to resurrect our saviors. Can't we? Harmony asked. Is it not possible that the humans might have a solution we haven't considered? They have had 500 years to think about their situation, after all. 500 years of frozen time, Lyra protested. They wouldn't have experienced any of that. Time flows differently in the space between seconds, Harmony replied. From their perspective, they have been conscious and aware throughout their imprisonment. They have been studying the entity, learning its weaknesses, preparing for the possibility of escape. The research team exchanged glances. The idea that the humans had been actively working on their own rescue was both thrilling and terrifying. If they had found a way to permanently neutralize the entity, then their rescue would be safe. But if they hadn't? There is only one way to know for certain, Harmony said. We must ask them. Over the next several weeks, the combined efforts of galactic science and Wandra technology created something unprecedented. A communication link that could penetrate the dimensional anomaly without destabilizing it. The process required the coordinated effort of over 10,000 scientists and engineers from hundreds of species, all working toward a single goal. When the moment came to establish contact, representatives from every major civilization gathered in the laboratory. The communication array hummed with barely contained energy as it reached across impossible distances to touch minds that existed outside of normal space-time. The first voice they heard was unmistakably human, speaking with the same calm professionalism that had characterized Captain Santos 5 centuries earlier. This is Captain Maria Santos of the Absolution's Edge. We're receiving your transmission. It's good to hear voices from the outside universe again. The laboratory erupted in cheers that quickly died as the implications of her words sank in. The humans had been aware, conscious, and presumably working throughout their dimensional imprisonment. Captain Santos, Professor said into the communication array, this is Professor of the Galactic Restoration Project. We're here to offer you and your crew extraction from the dimensional anomaly. There was a pause before Santos replied, and when she did, her voice carried a note of amusement. Professor, we appreciate the offer, but we need to discuss something with you first. We've learned quite a bit about our situation over the past few centuries. What have you learned? The entity you helped us trap isn't just contained, it's been slowly weakening. The dimensional explosion didn't just compress it into a single point. It created a feedback loop that's been gradually dissolving its quantum coherence. Doctor estimates that it will be completely neutralized within the next few decades. Doctor's voice joined the conversation. The fascinating thing is that the process has been teaching us about the fundamental nature of reality itself. We've developed theoretical frameworks for technology that your civilizations won't discover for thousands of years. But here's the important part, Captain Santos continued. If you extract us now, the dimensional collapse will release the entity before it's been fully neutralized. It will be weaker than before, but still capable of threatening the galaxy. However, Doctor added, if you give us access to the quantum manufacturing capabilities that we can sense in your communication array, we can complete the neutralization process ourselves, and then safely extract both ourselves and a completely powerless entity that can be studied rather than feared. Professor looked around the laboratory at the assembled scientists and diplomats. The proposal was elegant, but it required trusting beings who had been isolated in a dimensional prison for 5 centuries. What exactly do you need? She asked. We need you to create a stable dimensional bridge that will allow us to project quantum manipulation fields outside the anomaly, Santos replied. Think of it as giving us a very, very long arm that can reach back into normal space-time. Harmony of distant stars stepped forward. This is possible, though dangerous. The bridge would create a temporary vulnerability in the dimensional barriers. How temporary? Asked Chancellor. 6 hours, Doctor answered. That's all the time we need to complete the neutralization sequence and prepare for extraction. The debate that followed lasted 3 days. Scientists, politicians, and philosophers argued about the risks and benefits of allowing the humans to complete their work from within the dimensional prison. Some argued that any risk was too great. Others countered that the humans had already proven their commitment to galactic safety. In the end, it was Ambassador who cast the deciding vote. Though ancient by any standard, he had insisted on being present for this historic decision. 5 centuries ago, he said slowly, these beings volunteered for certain death to save a galaxy that barely knew they existed. They succeeded beyond all expectation, and then spent 500 years of consciousness working to complete the job they started. If we don't trust them now, we don't deserve the salvation they provided. The vote was unanimous. The dimensional bridge took another month to construct, requiring technology that pushed the boundaries of what galactic science thought possible. When it was finally ready, the connection between realities was so tenuous that only information could pass through, no matter, no energy, only pure data. Bridge established, reported the chief technician. We have a stable quantum link to the anomaly's interior. Beginning neutralization sequence, came Doctor's voice across the dimensional gap. Estimated completion time, 5 hours, 47 minutes. What followed was the most tense period in galactic history since the original entity crisis. Across known space, populations gathered around communication devices to listen to the progress reports from inside the dimensional prison. The humans worked with the methodical precision that had characterized their species, never showing doubt or hesitation despite the magnitude of their task. Neutralization at 40%, Doctor reported after 3 hours. The entity is offering significant resistance, but it's weakening faster than anticipated. 60% neutralization achieved, came the update an hour later. The entity appears to be attempting to merge with the dimensional structure itself, compensating with resonance dampeners. As the 5th hour approached, tension reached its peak. If the humans failed now, the entity might break free with knowledge gained from 5 centuries of studying their prison. 80% neutralization, Doctor announced. Final phase beginning now. Then silence. For 20 agonizing minutes, no communication came from the dimensional prison. Scientists checked and rechecked their equipment, but the quantum link remained stable. The humans were simply not responding. Finally, Captain Santos's voice broke the silence. Neutralization complete. The entity has been reduced to inert quantum residue, beginning extraction preparation. The cheers that erupted across the galaxy could be heard from 3 star systems away. The extraction process itself took another 6 hours, as the humans worked to safely collapse the dimensional anomaly while preserving themselves and the neutralized remains of the entity. When the Absolution's edge finally materialized in normal spacetime, it looked exactly as it had 5 centuries earlier, frozen at the moment of their sacrifice. The 300 crew members who emerged from the ship were unchanged by their experience, though their eyes held knowledge that few beings could imagine. They had spent 5 centuries in contemplation, study, and preparation, emerging with insights that would revolutionize galactic civilization. Captain Santos stood on the dock of Station, now massively expanded and renamed Humanity Memorial Station, and looked around at the representatives of dozens of species who had gathered to welcome them back to existence. "It's good to be back," she said simply, "though I have to say you've done some impressive work while we were gone." Ambassador, now supported by life-extending technology that barely kept him mobile, approached the captain with tears in his ancient eyes. "Captain Santos," he said, "on behalf of every living being in the galaxy, welcome home." Santos clasped the old ambassador's hand gently. "Thank you, Ambassador, but we're not home yet. We've got work to do." "Work?" Santos smiled with the same confidence that had once driven her species to attempt the impossible. "The entity we just neutralized came from somewhere. Its technology, its capabilities, its very existence suggests that there are threats in the universe that make our little galaxy look like a small, peaceful neighborhood." She gestured toward the stars visible through the station's massive windows. We've learned a lot in the past 5 centuries. We've seen the edges of reality, mapped the boundaries between existence and void, and discovered principles of physics that most civilizations never encounter. What are you suggesting? We're suggesting that the galaxy needs guardians, Doctor said as she joined the conversation. Not just defenders, but explorers, researchers, and protectors who can face the impossible and find ways to make it possible. Captain Santos nodded. We've been changed by our experience. We exist now partially outside normal space-time, which gives us capabilities that we're still learning to understand. We can go places and do things that would be impossible for purely physical beings. We want to form an organization, Commander Martinez added, approaching the group with several other crew members. A force dedicated to protecting not just our galaxy, but all galaxies from threats that conventional civilizations couldn't even perceive, let alone combat. Ambassador stared at them in amazement. You've just returned from 5 centuries of imprisonment, and you're volunteering for another impossible mission. Santos laughed, and the sound carried the same reckless optimism that had once driven humanity to build reality bombs and fight entities that consumed star systems. Ambassador, she said, we're human. Impossible missions are what we do. The formation of what became known as the Guardian Corps marked the beginning of a new era in galactic history. The 300 humans, enhanced by their dimensional experience and armed with technologies that bordered on miraculous, became the galaxy's first line of defense against threats that originated beyond the boundaries of known space. They established bases in the void between galaxies, created early warning systems that monitored the fundamental structure of reality itself, and developed protocols for responding to cosmic-level threats. When reality itself was threatened, they were there. When the impossible needed to be attempted, they volunteered. Over the centuries that followed, other species joined their ranks, beings who shared humanity's peculiar combination of optimism, determination, and willingness to sacrifice everything for the greater good. The Guardian Corps grew from 300 volunteers into a multi-galactic organization dedicated to protecting existence itself. But at its heart, it remained fundamentally human in spirit. When faced with certain destruction, they asked not, how do we surrender? But how do we fight? When presented with impossible odds, they saw not defeat but challenge. When called upon to sacrifice everything, they did so with joy and determination. And across the universe, in dimensions both physical and metaphysical, the name human became synonymous with hope, courage, and the absolute refusal to accept defeat. The entity that had once threatened to consume the galaxy was studied, understood, and its remains used to develop defenses against similar threats. The dimensional anomaly that had served as its prison became a monument to sacrifice and determination, visited by pilgrims from 1,000 worlds who came to understand what it truly meant to refuse to surrender. On Earth, now a shrine world visited by billions, children learned the stories of their ancestors who had looked at certain extinction and chosen to fight anyway. They learned that being human meant more than just biological heritage. It meant carrying the flame of defiance against impossible odds, the determination to protect others regardless of cost, and the absolute faith that there was always a way to win. As Captain Santos had said in her final report to the Galactic Council, we came, we fought, and we saved everyone. But more importantly, we showed the universe that someone will always be willing to stand up and say no to the darkness. That's not just humanity's gift to the galaxy, that's our promise to existence itself. The stars themselves seemed to shine a little brighter after that, as if the universe itself was smiling.